From Olympia, an in-depth look at decisions at the state capitol and how they impact you. This is The Impact.
Hello and welcome to The Impact. I'm Mike McClanahan. The Senate passed a joint Democratic House and Senate transportation funding package totaling roughly $17 billion over 16 years. The bill's authors say the Move Ahead Washington plan includes more than $3 billion for public transportation and pedestrian and bike transportation upgrades. It would fund 4 new ferries and electrify 2 existing ferries. It contains about $3 billion for road and bridge maintenance and funds infrastructure projects like replacing the I-5 Columbia River Bridge that separates Vancouver from Portland. It would also cover the cost of replacing culverts that block fish migration routes, which the state is required to remove by 2030. The Democratic funding plan relies on a mix of federal and state dollars. Unlike previous transportation packages, this one does not include a gas tax increase and revolves heavily around more than $5 billion expected to come from companies bidding on the right to emit greenhouse gases under the new state cap and trade law. Democratic transportation leaders also included a new 6-cent per gallon tax on fuel exports from Washington refineries to other states such as Oregon, which gets most of its gasoline from Washington. The transportation funding package includes higher driver's license fees, and it would give local governments more taxing authority by empowering cities and counties to tax internet, phone, and natural gas service providers. We've got Democratic House Transportation Committee Chair Jake Fye and Ranking Republican Member Andrew Barkis standing by. Welcome to the show. I'd like to hear from each of you about this first question, but let's start with Representative Fye. What do you predict will be the most noticeable changes for Washington residents if this plan is enacted?
Well, I think it's several things, but let's just cover what I think are the most important. One, you'll see that the issue of fish passage and fixing the culverts under the U.S. Supreme Court ruling, those culverts will get fixed. You'll see ferries, good work on the workforce, but also vessels being constructed to meet the needs of really out-of-date vessels, and they will be electrified vessels. So you may not see it, but there'll be the environmental benefit of not consuming that fuel, instead consuming electricity. You'll see completion of the 520 bridge, the completion of the 405 work that involves bus rapid transit. You'll see the finish of the Gateway project and the Columbia River Bridge. Those are probably the most physical things that you'll see, but there will be also other improvements, whether it's trails or whether it's better transit service. You'll see a lot of things, I think, from the package that we're implementing.
Representative Barkis, same question. What do you predict will be the most noticeable changes for Washington residents if this plan is enacted?
Well, thanks, Mike, and it's always good to be here with you and of course, my great colleague, Chair Fye. Well, I think the chair laid out quite a bit that's on the list. I might come at it from a little different perspective. I think one of the things that people are going to notice is maybe some increase in their costs as some of these things, but it's yet to be determined how this all gets funded and shaken out as we go through the rest of this session. I think hitting some of the high points, both the chair and I agree there's a need for a lot of the projects he listed, 167, 509, the Gateway project, huge to the port infrastructure in Tacoma and getting our goods and services. There is money put into this proposal and something that we're still debating on maintenance and preservation. And I think that's really where most people are going to see this in their local communities and districts. Maintenance and preservation is not just fixing a pothole. Those are projects. Those are improvements to bridges, to intersections. Really the stuff that is the most important to most people throughout the entirety of our state. So as the chair said, some of the stuff you don't see every day. We always say that maintenance and preservation is not the gleaming, shiny stuff, but it's the most important. We need to do more of it. I think fish patches is important and to fulfill that injunction. So there are a lot of things on here, and there's I would say as we get into the show, maybe we'll talk a bit about priorities. So.
All right, another question here, Representative Fye. In developing this plan, how did you weigh transportation needs and available funds when deciding how much should go towards the highway and bridge system with all the work that needs to be done there, and also how much should go towards the public transportation systems and carriers that were impacted by the pandemic?
Well, great question, and thank you for the opportunity to chat about that. So really, the way our work has come about is that we really have two separate packages. One package is related to the carbon reduction bill that was passed last session and the resources that are available for that. So that's where you'll find the improvements to transit, electrification of the ferries, and additional carbon reduction investments, as well as active transportation, trails, better pedestrian access. So that's sort of on one side of the ledger. On the other side of the ledger is the highway ledger. And, you know, this one, this is not the typical transportation package. There are not a lot of new projects, hardly any new projects in this package. This is about taking care of shortfalls that we have from both the Gateway project and 520, for example. It is taking care of that legal obligation on the culverts and fixing the ferry system so we really have an operational ferry system. This is different, a really different package. And I really appreciate the comments from my good ranking member about talking about preservation and maintenance. This is an all-time high in a transportation package for preservation and maintenance. I wish it could be even more than that. And it would be more than that if we wouldn't have these cost increases for other projects. But I mean, we suffer from the situation where prices will go up. We've had disruptions in the construction industry that has delayed projects. And when it's a delayed project, that generally means it's going to cost us more to deliver that project. And a lot of that was pandemic related, and now we're dealing with supply problems, which will probably be an additional burden on us to be able to deliver these projects without having to put even more money into them.
Representative Barkis, what's your position on the funding levels and the balance that this package strikes between the various transportation sector needs?
Well, Mike, I would. I agree and I disagree, with a good chair. I know that we have this climate commitment dollars from the revenue of the taxes and such that are going to be generated from that as that's implemented. I struggle. I know that transit needs this. I just was looking at some data that was provided by our staff, and we were looking into funding level and between federal and all the stuff that goes into transit. It's at an all-time high in 2020. Even though we hear and we do know that there was impacts from COVID, of course, with fare and ridership and everything else, but we're allocating somewhere around $3 billion into transit, another 1.3 billion to bike and ped. These are what we call active transportations. Would love to see some of those dollars redirected, because as the chair indicated, it is historical, $3 billion towards maintenance and preservation, but the secretary of the agency told us it's more like $1 billion a year. So we're like $10 billion needed for maintenance and preservation. And I think it comes down to, again, how these are prioritized. And if we would have had more time to kind of work together and talk about this, we could have taken a little bit of different look of how this money would be allocated over the course of the long term. I do agree with him. This is a different package. The typical, long laundry list of new projects is not there. And I applaud him for that. There are some ones that we both agree on there. Because we haven't finished the last transportation package. I mean, connecting Washington is still not done. As a matter of fact, we're using some of this new package to pay for some shortfalls for the existing package. And it is part of what's happened over the last couple of years, but it is also indicative of many years, in the ability for the agency to deliver on these projects, the cost overruns, the regulatory changes. And this is where that reform conversation comes in. It typically is around these packages. And I believe that we need to look at this more holistically over the longer term, as opposed to another proposal or package. We really need to look at long-term stability, We've talked about that. There's some other ideas on how we can do this to both accomplish what's on this list and reach our mutual priorities, but maybe for a longer period of time without having to resort to another revenue package.
Representative Fye, I have a follow-up question, but if you would like to, I'm curious if you want to weigh in on how this package came together.
Well, for the House, we did 80 listening sessions across the state, and we put together what I guess I'd call value statements, which I shared with the good member, Representative Barkis, about what the priorities ought to be. And so it was like, priorities were preservation and maintenance, finishing what we started, an emphasis on multimodal investments, and fish passage. The other part that I would add is the Climate Commitment Act money has to pass the test that it is about carbon reduction. So it doesn't pass, more highways doesn't pass the test of reducing carbon. Transit does, active transportation does, and carbon reduction does. And that's why we're paying, for instance, the electrification costs of the new ferries out of the carbon money, because it is it's the biggest user in the state of carbon, and quite frankly, a very dirty form of petroleum products that are used to fuel the ferry fleet. So if there would have been more resources that we thought we could have included on the highway side, we would have done that. But we really segregated all the money, that the $10 billion that's in the highway side is all highway related. It's not related to active transportation. That's what the carbon funding is for, and we segregated the funding that way.
I want to switch gears and talk specifically about ferries for a minute. If you want to weigh in, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, Mike, I apologize for that. Yes, they did do that. I wish it would have been the chair and ranking listening tour together, but that wasn't the case. We kind of followed along behind that. And talk to the stakeholders, and also look at the stakeholders that were brought in, as far as a cross-section of the state. I do agree with the priorities and values. We shared that, as amazingly, we're about 60% in agreement on our priorities and values. It's maybe, and how they were ranked might be a little differently, but there was a lot of agreement there. But, we're moving towards an EV world. We're spending a lot of money on charging infrastructure. We know the manufacturers are going in. So we're going to need lanes and capacity, even if we switch to electric vehicles. So the faster we move people from point A to B, the less pollution. So there could be that argument for carbon reduction as we go through that same thing, and we could always change that and how those monies are directed. So again, just kind of the priorities and how these monies are kind of put into play is something that we still need to have that conversation and keep working on.
If we could switch gears to ferries for a minute here. Representative Fye, the pandemic hobbled the state ferry system, and so after frustrating delays and canceled trips over the last couple of years, Washington State Ferries in some instances are offering fewer options for riders currently. Is there anything in this funding package that would fast track the replacement of new ferry workers to try and restore services to pre-pandemic levels, along with the investments in the equipment?
Yeah, so there are. We're putting money into that. What the pandemic uncovered, both it uncovered and exacerbated a problem that should have been addressed some time ago, and that is planning for the workforce of the future for the ferry system. And I think both Representative Barkis and I have been on that issue, right? We saw that. We asked for workforce plans from the ferries system for some time, and the thing where you train people for the summer and then you let them go, and very few people return, is sort of example of the systematic problem we had with the ferry system. Who is going to wait around a year in Never Land, so to speak, until they see whether they can get picked up full time on the ferry system? That's one of the big changes in here. We're going to, because we're so short, we're going to have people be there year round now. And so that we will have people that can be assured when apply for a seasonal job, that it's really going to be for a full-time job. And it's strange to me that change wasn't made years ago. But that's one of the changes we're going to make is to make sure we have a reliable ferry system, and that means the workers are there and available to us.
Representative Barkis, do you have anything to add on that point?
Well, yes. I mean, both the chair and I a couple of years ago saw this as a problem we were dealing with, the overtime in the budget. That was our first clue that there was a problem with staffing. And I think we are doing stuff, and we're doing stuff in this budget to try to address it. And I would compliment the ferry system, a little bit on what they have done. But Mike, it was COVID, the vaccine mandate, all the things, kind of this perfect storm over the course of summer, and we lost a lot of workforce as a result of that. Now we've got to make up for that moving forward. So workforce development is huge. There should be more conversations, and I would hope we will be having them. When it comes to the structure, there's all 12, I think, collective bargaining units, all the different variants. It's very complicated, and how they go about, assigning the work, how they call them in, very old type of system. So we're allocating some funding to improve and modernize the way that they call people into work and everything else. All of these should contribute to a smoother running system that is part of our highway system, and it should. And then that reliability too, with looking at the new ferries and what needs to be done, the only concern with like the chair said, I mean, we're doing this now coming out of COVID. We have supply chain issues, we have labor issues in actually building, and then we've got to get it all sorted out on the cost of these new ferry boats, and to get this in motion, because it'll take years to get these done and into the pipeline. So we can increase that reliability, which is one of the other factors on why we saw the interruptions in service.
Mike, we just, we started the work. The legislature started the work. We have still under contract some real fine experts on this subject matter that are going to be giving us specific recommendations. But that was work that we started putting forward because we were so frustrated with the way the ferry system seemed to be going, with lack of planning on workforce for the future.
We've got just over 4 minutes left. So for the next few questions, if we could try to be a little bit succinct, that would be helpful. Did you have something to add, Representative Barkis?
No, we're just politicians. We're not very succinct.
Well, these can be complicated topics. Well, one issue that some critics have raised about the plan, they say it doesn't do enough for county roads, which make up a significant portion of the road miles in the state. What do you think about that, Representative Fye?
Well, it is, I would say, I would agree. It's a shortcoming. We put into the package some local revenue options so that money could be raised locally. But in terms of my view of things, we have to negotiate with the Senate, and we obviously have limits in terms of how much money we can spend based on the revenues that we raised. It is a shortcoming that we're going to have to address. Previously, in previous packages, help for counties and cities has been tied to a gas tax increase. There's no gas tax increase in here where we could distribute a portion of that to the local government. So that was one of the impediment of trying to figure this out. And of course, all those other priorities are very important. And hopefully the preservation and maintenance money will go out there to help local governments as well.
Representative Barkis, what are your thoughts about the investments in the local roads?
Yeah, I think there's a shortfall. Our local governments are struggling to be able to deliver. I've got pages and pages of projects that are both constituent and member requests tying into local projects on top of it. So yeah, that's something that would have been good to discuss further as this was being developed, to make sure that our local governments had the resources and in a dedicated stream. I've talked about some different ideas. The chair and I have been talking about some different ideas to make sure we've got money that we can look at every budget cycle to make sure. So it's not just guesswork. They do have a local option. That's a tax that they're going to have to go out for, on utilities, phones and such. It's another thing that's in this package. That's a tough sell all the way around. And it may not be a gas tax. There's other taxes and fees in here, as we both know. And so that's a little different on how we get those dollars down to the local governments. But I think that's a conversation we're going to continue to have.
And just on that note, to Representative Fye, are there any projections about how much this might add to a household bill if the city uses its full, I believe, 2% taxing authority on each of these bills?
Well, it's local option, right? And so no, there aren't projections on the individual option that is out there, not yet.
So the fuel export tax, this is a new thing. This would be something that would reportedly hit Oregon hardest because Oregon, of the states that would be impacted, gets the most gasoline from Washington. And at least one Oregon legislator told a reporter that the state would likely consider retaliatory options if this is enacted. Are you concerned in any way about that type of scenario, Representative Fye?
Well, I won't discount it, but you know, there's a lot of people that live in Clark County and other places that work in the Portland metropolitan area that have to pay an income tax. So it'll be interesting because they pay an income tax just by the fact that they work in that state, not by the fact that they reside in that state. So I'm sensitive to that. You know, but we're also building a bridge that I hope will be very important, and we have to find the funding for that Columbia River Bridge, and which benefits both sides.
We've got just about 30 seconds left. Representative Barkis, if you could close us out with your response to that issue.
It's problematic. It's going to be challenged, I imagine, the courts. There was a mention by Chair Elias that Texas does it. I've got documents in front of me that from the Texas tax consultant for whatever. They do not do this particular thing. They do a different type of a sales tax or the tax between the states. This is $2 billion of their proposal. It's going to be problematic. I think it's problematic. I think, Mike, there's a lot of money that's sitting in the state right now with all this revenue surplus, and we propose some other things I think that we should bring to the table to discuss for long-range funding that's not a new tax.
We are out of time. Thank you both very much for your insight again. Chair of the House Transportation Committee, Representative Fye, and also the ranking Republican member, Representative Barkis. We appreciate your perspective.
Thank you very much.
Still ahead on The Impact. Sawzalls and ski masks. A look at bills to clamp down on catalytic converter theft. Plus, proposed gun magazine restrictions and open carry no-go zones. That's next. Legislators on the right and left are pushing for new ways to crack down on catalytic converter thefts. Republicans and Democrats have sponsored bills to cut down on the damaging crime by increasing or adding regulations to hold scrapyards accountable for buying the emissions system components. Catalytic converters use precious metals such as platinum and palladium to reduce the environmental impact of vehicle exhaust. Thieves armed with reciprocating saws crawl under parked vehicles to cut off the converters, which can sell for several $100s at a scrap metal facility. For the owners of the targeted vehicles, it almost always means thousands of dollars in repairs or a totaled car. House Bill 1815 would require scrap metal businesses to document that a catalytic converter was removed from a vehicle registered in the seller's name before purchasing. It passed the House and now moves to the Senate. Senate Bill 5495 would impose felony penalties for the purchase of a stolen catalytic converter. It passed out of 2 Senate committees, but appears to have missed the House of Origin cutoff deadline. A party line vote in the House advanced a bill to outlaw walking into a city council or school board meeting with a rifle slung over your shoulder or a pistol holstered on your hip. House Bill 1630 would make it a misdemeanor crime to openly carry a firearm, a knife, a club, or another obvious weapon in a local government building used for meetings or any venue where a city council or county commission meeting is underway. School board facilities would be off limits for open carry during board meetings. There are exemptions for licensed concealed carry of a weapon, except for election-related facilities where open or concealed carry of a firearm would be illegal. Local government and election administrators would be required to post signs warning of the prohibition. The proposed law passed on a vote of 57 yeas to 41 nays, with the House Democratic majority backing the ban and Republicans voting against it. House Bill 1630 did advance to the Senate before the Tuesday deadline. Another gun-related bill that advanced before the Tuesday cutoff would restrict high-capacity firearm magazines. Senate Bill 5078 would outlaw the sale, manufacture, and distribution of gun magazines that hold more than 10 rounds of ammunition in Washington. The high-capacity magazine ban passed largely along party lines in the Senate with a 28-20 vote, with the Senate Democratic majority backing the measure and Senate Republicans voting against it. That's it for this episode. Please join us next week for more in-depth interviews you won't find anywhere else. I'm Mike McClanahan. Thank you for watching. Have a great week.